Good morning, everyone. It is just after 10 a.m. PST here in Vancouver. Peter McMath here from WPIC. I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes. I see lots of people dialing in as we get started this morning. Hope everyone's having a great week so far. For those of you who don't know myself, I'm Peter McMath. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here, currently based out of Vancouver on the West Coast, and really fortunate to be joined by Jacob Cooke today, our co-founder and chief executive officer. Jacob, how's it going?
It's going well, thank you.
Great, great. Well, look, we're really excited for today's session. To speak about all things digital, e-commerce, direct to consumer as it relates to fashion in China today. I'll share a little bit about the firm, who we are, what we do, how we do it, to set the stage. But for today's session, we largely want to open this up for some Q&A with the attendees this morning to allow you guys to ask some questions to Jacob based on what we're seeing on the ground in market. We've been fortunate to be operating a pretty significant fashion retail apparel business. We represent a number of fashion brands in the category today across a wide range of product categories and companies at all different stages and sizes. And so, we really want to use this session to allow you guys to ask questions, whether your organization has never entered China before, or whether you have a significant business today and are looking to grow that and transform that further. And so there's a Q&A portal inside the GoToMeeting webinar portal here. Feel free to input your questions into that as we go through today's session at any point in time, and hopefully we'll be able to get. I see a number of questions coming in already, so hopefully we'll be able to get to everyone. But Jacob, I want to jump into it and maybe just set the stage for everyone. As you look out into Q4 here in 2022. What are you seeing in the fashion, retail, apparel landscape? What trends are you seeing? How are brands performing? Are we growing still? What's the latest?
Well, you're going into Q4, so quarter over quarter, yeah, you're certainly for the online space growing quite a bit. This is normally right up there, if not the best quarter, the second best quarter for online sales. We see fashion is one of the areas that was hit pretty hard during COVID, especially early on. We've seen it actually make recoveries. We've seen a lot of the giants, such as LVMH, report, flat to rising revenues now, which is a turnaround from where it has been. Lululemon and other sort of Athletica type brands are doing quite well. I mean, they're probably at the highest end of the growth range right now. And as people start to travel again, we've seen a direct correlation with that getting easier. And again, fashion and luxury fashion coming back quite strong, actually.
That's great. That's great. Let's. I want to get into some specific questions. I think a number of brands that we've been speaking to are pretty early stage in their journey as they're thinking about entering China for the first time. One of the questions that's come in has been around resourcing and, internally type of resources that an organization needs to have prepared before they think about market entry. Can you speak to that broadly?
Well, I think that if you're looking at complete and total market entry from there, from scratch, I mean, there's a lot of steps. I mean, I think for a lot of brands at that point, you're looking at sort of the quickest launch, lowest barrier to entry. That's either going to happen with the cross-border local stores in terms of Tmall. There's that. There's gaining influencers and followers, starting to understand, how much earned media is out there for you already, maybe. Really creating demand, and then, running a really efficient ship in terms of localization, getting your model shots done properly, localizing for market, and then, doing that 4 times a year pretty quickly and pretty quick turnover. So I think resources, being able to share a lot of the creative that is done, it is helpful for your partner in China for sure, and being able to collaborate, with the brands what the brand is trying to say to consumers, make sure that's getting translated and localized correctly. And then, listening to your local partners for the data on the market.
That's great. I want to ask a follow-up to that. And I see a question here on localization. And so the question is, does content and marketing collateral need to be significantly changed for a fashion brand? Do we need to use Asian models for our images and videos? What's your advice to brands on that?
Yeah, certainly some of them. I think with most of the brands, we're now pretty happy with the data that we have, that it's more successful, conversion rates are higher the more Asian models are there. I mean, and anecdotally, I think it's just easier to see what that item is going to look like when you have a model that looks more like the buyer, not from somebody halfway around the world. So yeah, we would normally reshoot the majority, if not all, the majority of shots that were given. And actually, in a lot of cases, brands are actually using those globally too, the stuff that's shot in China. So it can work both ways.
Great. That's great. I want to maybe shift to the broader channel landscape. A lot of brands, have questions, I think, about the key digital platforms. I think there's a lot of awareness of Tmall. I see a question here around specifically for fashion and apparel categories. Should a brand consider, JD.com, maybe lesser known than Tmall, VIP? They're saying they already have a Tmall store in China. What other channels should they be considering? And a follow-up to that was around Douyin.
Well, yeah, I just skipped the follow-up. I mean, that's really your secondary platform right now. Douyin is really gaining in the fashion space, and it's allowing for a lot of creativity. So we would always like to see early adoption from brands onto platforms where, customer acquisition costs may be lower because of that early adopter. We've seen actually huge gains in fashion, and I think that just in general, the format with short video and live broadcast works really well for fashion. Search algorithms on Tmall and the other platforms that you mentioned are very algorithmic based, right? So they don't make suggestions very far off what stuff that you've already bought. But seeing a brand run through their entire catalog on live models over a 2-hour show really sort of exposes buyers to a lot more of the brand's range. And I think it makes the experience a lot more fun too. It's interactive. So if you wanted the model to try on that or that one, you're capable of doing that. So the format's exciting for fashion. It's dominating there. We're seeing it, health, nutraceutical, some men's products too, but it really dominating Douyin in on fashion.
For those brands that maybe aren't as familiar with Douyin as you and I are, maybe just if you could share a little bit about the company, the parallels to TikTok. Obviously, they're owned by the same parent company, ByteDance. Douyin has obviously been growing massively. Can you speak to some of those growth numbers and their user base?
So yeah, in terms of the app download, I mean, it's darn near saturation in China. It is the original TikTok. TikTok started from ByteDance in China. Douyin was first. And instead of really taking advertising dollars and then directing it to third-party e-commerce sites, they've really tried to go at a lot of the pie. So a monetization strategy that goes well beyond just advertising. And they're doing quite a good job of it. Like I said, I think the overall experience benefits certain categories, if not most. And shoppers are moving over really, really quickly. It's just such a more immersive experience.
Yeah. Yeah, when you talk about penetration, I mean, the latest numbers that have been shared with me from Douyin has been, I think they're now at over 600 million daily active users with average on app time of over 2 hours per day. And so, certainly would echo your comments on it being a platform that especially fashion brands can really use content to probably connect with their consumer. Going back to some of your content points earlier. I want to move on to another question that's coming in here. Question on IP protection. How should a fashion brand, obviously, these are brands specifically, right? How should a fashion brand think about IP protection in China today?
You've got to be all over your trademarks, and we see a lot of these smaller brands that are starting up right now. They really neglect this. you can really get held up in a lot of international markets if you don't have your brand protected and trademarked all over the world. It's an expense that should be done so early on. And unfortunately, we still see people lagging behind, especially in overseas markets, and getting their trademarks in there properly. So that number one. Counterfeits, it's not as big of a problem as it used to be. You know, it can be pretty tough, but you know, there's lots of services and web scrapers that you can use to protect that, and most brands are utilizing that stuff right now. So programmatic complaints, takedowns. I got to say though, it is a much cleaner environment certainly than it was 8 or 10 years ago. Focus on those trademarks.
Sure. Yeah. Great advice. Maybe more tactically, and I see another question here from Edward. You know, how does a fashion brand think about labeling? You know, is that something they need? You know, what are the requirements around labeling?
Yeah, so labeling does need to be changed for the market, both in cross-border and local, but the majority of time your 3PL is going to handle that. So, I mean, two of our 3 warehouses have labeling facilities, both for cross-border, FTZ and domestic. Different requirements for each, but in general, it's easier to do that over here than it is at production.
Great.
So we can sticker over an existing hang tag label that was designed for another country, for example.
That's great. I'm just going to I'll just take a minute here just to remind everyone. I see lots of questions coming in, but feel free to use the Q&A portal as we're going through here and input any questions that you may have. If anything here sparks some interest or some questions, we'd love to take the time to answer it. I want to move on, and so you know, there's a question here on pricing strategy, and so you know, this individual's asking, we'd like to know the suggested pricing strategy. Should we consider more about competitors or cost driven? Tmall has a lot of promotions. Shall we consider that too? So maybe, I guess, in terms of what's driving pricing strategy, should pricing strategy be driven by the comp set, or should it be driven by, you know, their costs and margins? I guess maybe to summarize that.
I would strongly recommend going costs and margins. If you do it the other way and drive it by your competitors, you can get eroded down so fast. I think you need to really focus on the value prop and build that brand up. If you want to play on price in China, that can be a very painful game for you.
Yeah, it's probably a fast road to zero.
Slippery slope for sure.
Yeah. I want to keep moving through here. Questions here around timeline. So this is probably more applicable for a new brand that's entering the market. You know, what type of time horizon should a brand be looking at as they think about time to activation, time to go live, starting from zero?
Well, it's not that tricky in terms of a product category. So launches in 60 days are fairly normal within category. I think you need to do some analysis on which of your SKUs, you know, looking at big data, taking a SKU selection, but probably if you're talking about a limited SKU selection, which most brands would go to market with, you're in a 60-day or less.
Great. I see another question coming in here just on general growth rates, you know, specifically to the fashion segment in China. You know, this is a question around just, you know, I think the market reaching a cap or a ceiling in 2018, you know, and what has been growth, I guess, in the last, you know, 3 to 4 years? What have you seen in the fashion vertical around year-over-year growth?
Well, in the last, almost 4 years now, if you look at that cycle, it's been tough. I mean, there's been a couple really tough years for fashion and apparel due to COVID lockdowns. It's one of the areas that gets affected most negatively. Like I said, I think in the last sort of like 3 to 6 months, we're seeing reports that people are starting to grow again. The downturn is flatlined. So what we're probably going to get, obviously, is what you call those revenge spending or COVID bumps on the way out, and then we're probably going to level off to a slower growth. going forward. I think the days of sort of us being in the double digits, mid double digits year over year, probably not the case. Douyin is going to lead to organic growth though, just in terms of being more of an impulse buy platform. It's going to lead to more consumption in this category. But in general, in our feeling that we're coming, like I said, coming off of what was a pretty tough time, and we're expecting a pretty big bump back and then a leveling out after that.
That's great. And is that, as you're looking at brands that are probably already, highly established in market, that have maybe had existing, businesses, pretty significant businesses likely within Tmall and JD, some of these established marketplaces, the growth, is that what I'm hearing you say is that they should really be, setting their sights on some of these newer platforms, some of these social commerce platforms. Is that your advice to a fashion brand today that's maybe already established inside of the big marketplaces?
For everything that we're launching now, and in 2022 for a while, it's been a Douyin Tmall co-strategy. Social commerce definitely can have a role in there too, sort of really depends on the outcome, but if you're sitting there with two right now, it's really those two, and there's not really a close third for fashion right now, just based on GMV growth numbers for us.
Great. Do you believe, and this, I'll take this other question here, when you think about the requirements for a fashion brand to be successful, Q4 22, Q1 23, think about the opposite of like a net new brand. Can they be successful without Tmall, without JD to start? Is that an appropriate strategy? Maybe just going inside of Douyin as for their first step?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. It certainly is possible.
Great. Just a reminder, as we're I guess over the halfway mark here, for any questions that a brand has, feel free to put them into the Q&A. I'm working my way through the list here. Question just came in actually, just at the top here, around influencers and KOLs, and so the question is basically, is it worth paying the large amounts for some of these top tier celebrities, brand ambassadors, or smaller amounts on social with like KOLs and KOCs around maybe more product seeding versus some of the big celebrity endorsements? What's your advice on influencer strategy, whether we're talking micro influencers through to some of the bigger well-known names and celebrities that exist?
Well, okay, big question. So we're not really of the influence, except in certain cases. I think there's three strategies here. One, with the smaller influencers, no, we just don't feel that they work very well. I think that when people are smaller influencers are really trying to be influencers, I don't think there is such thing as a small influencer. So that can be pretty tough to get results. The larger influencers are very expensive. I mean, I think you need to sort of understand that there may not be any margin, but as part of a brand building activity, we are going to use them. We are going to conform to their commissions, prices, etc. But just of the goal of getting as much of our inventory out, walking around the street as possible. But I think you just need to understand that's what you're doing. It's really high revenue, low margin game there. But obviously, in terms of pinpointing exactly who you're going to use and do, you need to get that right. You need to get that right, as any strategy for fashion is.
Great. I see another question here from Fernando. With regards to back to the pricing question, should there be a relation or correlation between a North American, like your North American D2C site, and pricing in China? How should a brand think about that?
You absolutely should, because the buyers are savvy. There's Chinese diaspora all over the world. They're going to find that out and potentially lead to pretty negative stories. Burton is one that just got nailed for this about a month ago. So no, you should be in line absolutely with your overseas D2C sites for Chinese pricing.
Okay, that's great.
With some leeway, obviously, because there's duties and VAT, so the consumer does expect a slightly higher price, but within 17%.
I see another question here around specific, I guess, different topics specific to logistics. And so, I guess, as you think about the marketplace model, specifically, how does logistics work for a Western apparel brand? What are the options available to them? How does last mile fulfillment work, and how do we support with that?
Well, I think one of the things that, is more advanced specifically for fashion is the returns, right? And being able to put them back on the shelf from the warehouse level. So, that's important. Being, able, and great packaging also is extremely important in fashion too. That whole experience of them receiving that item, has to lead to them keeping it too, because of course the Tmall has, so does Douyin, escrow rules that basically allow people to return for any reason. So you need to minimize that, and great logistic, great last mile, great presentation really does that. But also when that comes back, being able to clean, repackage, and make sure that it's available again, help keep things efficient, keep your margins up. So those are, for fashion, I think, sort of the special things.
Great. There's a question coming in here on live streaming. We're obviously familiar, but we've got 11 studios in market, and I know the team is generally working 4 shifts around the clock producing content. But what's the state of live streaming today? How does a fashion brand leverage that? If they're not doing it already, should they be doing it? For ones that are already doing it, how do they do it better?
Yeah, there's a lot of poor quality live streaming out there. I think for the fashion brands, I think focus on Douyin, but run interactive fashion shows. This isn't hard. Like, it's not good enough to just sit there and talk about it. Have models show them, change different looks with different items, mix things up a little bit. But your ability to do that, and also do it in a two-way feedback environment, I mean, that should make brands pretty happy. That's some of the best ways to show off their wares, for sure.
That's great.
But we're doing the production, and that's what's important too. It's being owned by the brand, building up those sort of celebrities inside the brand. And doing that for larger brands about 8 hours a day.
Excellent. I want to maybe just get your insights, and maybe more out of my own curiosity, not a specific question here, just around different product categories, right? Fashion's a big vertical, not only from gender, but just different categories. Are there specific categories that you're seeing performing, better than others right now?
Yeah, for sure. So Lululemon, I think, probably largest growth that's out there. And people are there's a whole trend coming out of the pandemic that people are taking better care of themselves. Health and wellness is a thing. They're doing more yoga, they're doing more running. So that sort of athletic fashion is doing quite well, probably at the top of the sphere. And then I would say luxury fashion, like where LVMH is reporting flat to slightly up now, would be sort of in the lower growth end of that.
Got it. I know we're almost at time here. We've got 5 minutes left. I want to save some time at the end just to maybe allow you to leave, a couple pieces of advice for fashion brands that based on best practices that you're seeing, and things that they should keep in mind. I want to get to 1 or 2 more questions here before we get there, though. Question here on sizing. Is Asian fit necessary? If so, at what stage does a brand need to consider implementing Asia sizing? Is this something that should be done at the beginning, or later in their growth stages they gain some brand awareness? How do you advise on that?
Well, first of all, there's a couple of things here. One, I mean, your sizing profile is different, but that might mean for initial brands that you're way smaller in your inventory in the XLs, and you're way more stocked in smalls and mediums, without, say, making a China size. Footwear specifically has some issues. I think there's more people that are looking specifically at making footwear for Chinese, I think, just do with the foot arch. And clothing and apparel, I mean, certainly can be for Asian size. I think large brands are already doing that. Is it a necessary? No, it's not necessary, but I think just understand again that, yeah, you will be selling a different size in Asia, than especially Northeast Asia, than you will be in other parts of the world, but you should know that in advance using big data so that your inventory projections are accurate and going to reflect that.
Great. And then I'm just seeing a follow-up to that. So maybe more specifically, is that true within both the kids and juvenile category? And, you know, I guess I'm assuming your answer is more maybe in line with the adult category, but does the same apply to the kids category around Asia sizing?
Not so much, no. Not around the kids core categories as much as the adult. There's way more diversity in body type size at the adult level than there is at the kid level.
Okay. Jacob, before we wrap up, you know, what are 3 kind of takeaways that fashion brands need to be thinking about based on best practices today and some of the recent trends that you're seeing?
Number 1 is Douyin. Number 1 is understand that the way that you're going to be presenting and the content that you're going to be creating is going to change radically in the next couple of years all over the world. It's just going to start in China, but TikTok's gonna have those capabilities all over. So it's a great place to start and start to get those learnings and muscle memory for that. 2, we haven't seen again the post-COVID bump. That has happened in a lot of other markets. We're coming out of that. There's no reason to expect that we're not going to see that, especially in the mainland as well. And then I think the third thing, just in general, is understanding what's going to happen after that bump and the growth levels that are going to be seen. And it's still going to be one of the most important markets globally for fashion.
Outstanding. Jacob, really appreciate the time and discussion today. I know we didn't get to all the questions here, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you for all your insight today. For those of you who had questions that we didn't get to, you can email myself, peter.mcmath@wpic.co, and we'll get the question answered from the team accordingly. If you have other questions on WPIC and our work in the market, you can visit wpic.co to learn more about us. But I want to thank everyone for their time today and for joining today's session. So Jacob, thank you, and thanks to everyone for joining.
Thank you.